Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our April 22nd edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today we're bringing you state climatologist Dr. Justin Glisan for his outlook on the 2024 growing season. Then we'll welcome Brian Waddingham of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers to discuss the coalition's 20th anniversary and how their services for livestock farmers have evolved over the years. Let's start with Iowa's state climatologist, Dr. Justin Glisan, who had a chance to speak with spokesman reporter Bob Bion earlier this month.
Welcome, Justin, and thanks for being with us today. So let's start with some history, kind of where we've been the last few years, and we can't talk about that without discussing the lack of moisture and drought.
Yep, so drought is definitely the key word there over the last several growing seasons. This stretches back to spring of 2020 as we start to see precipitation deficits gradually stack up after a particularly wet period from 2018 to 2019, the second and 12th wettest years on record. You take 2018 and 2019 together, the wettest 2 calendar years in right now 152 years of records. So very wet conditions. We get into a drier pattern into early 2020. We see drought formation in west central Iowa, June, July of 2020, and now we're in the 196th week of D1 drought somewhere across the state. The longest drought in the U.S. Drought Monitor period of record, which goes back to 2000, but also the longest drought for the state since a period of 1954 to 1959. So this has been a longevity drought, and we're really seeing impacts meteorologically in soil moisture profiles, but also stream flows as well.
So let's talk a little bit about La Nina and El Nino. Would you mind explaining those a little bit? We were in La Nina for 3 years. We transitioned to El Nino that we're currently in, and then it looks like we're headed back to La Nina again maybe this summer. So what do all those mean for our weather patterns?
When we talk about El Nino and La Nina, it's part of a larger scale climate driver that we call ENSO, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. You can think of the Southern Oscillation as a large scale multi-decadal, so a very long time period, a climate pattern that sets up in the Pacific. El Nino and La Nina generally work on a 2 to 7 year cycle within the ENSO large-scale climate pattern. So you could think of a big wheel as ENSO and a small wheel moving around within that bigger wheel as El Nino and La Nina. El Nino is the warm phase. La Nina is the cold phase of what we look at as sea surface temperature anomalies in the equatorial Pacific. Why these anomalies or why these warmer or colder waters are important is that in the current waning strong El Nino phase that we're in, we see warmer sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific. The atmosphere responds to the warmth of that water and fires thunderstorms. Where those thunderstorms set up impacts where the jet stream and the storm track sets up over the United States. So as a dominant climate driver right now, El Nino and La Nina can give us a flavor for what type of weather patterns, particularly during the cold season and as we get into spring, of what we can expect on a large scale basis. In that La Nina phase, which only the third time since 1950 that we had 3 consecutive years of La Nina, thunderstorms are pushed further west in the Pacific Basin, and again, that has implications on the jet stream over the United States. We call it a teleconnection. And if we're looking at wintertime, it was a perfect example of a strong El Nino in that we generally see across the upper Midwest warmer temperatures, but also in meteorological winter, near normal to slightly wetter conditions. If you take the last 7 strong El Nino winters getting into early spring, 6 of those have been near normal to slightly wetter than average. Well, we had the 3rd warmest winter on record. February was the warmest February on record, along with the 2nd driest on record, but January and December were also slightly wetter than average. So overall, winter ended very warm, but also slightly wetter, which does correspond well with that strong El Nino. Now we're starting to see that warmth of the sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific wane, and a high probability of a transition, 83% chance in the April, May, June timeframe of what we call ENSO neutral, or right in between El Nino and La Nina. And then the climate models are suggesting a little over 60% of a potential weak to moderate La Nina getting into summer. Now, one more important point here is as we're in spring, we're in what we call the spring predictability barrier, and that we're transitioning from the large-scale wintertime behavior that we see large low-pressure systems come through and bring widespread rainfall and snowfall as we saw at the end of December into January. And we're transitioning to what we call mesoscale processes or thunderstorm-driven rainfall and precipitation events. When we're in that transition, the climate models have a difficult time producing seasonal outlooks as we get into late spring, summer, and into next fall. And that's once we get past that barrier, once we're in the more thunderstorm-driven precipitation regimes, that's when we can start to look at the short-term outlooks, but also the seasonal outlooks for better guidance.
So yeah, let's fast forward a little bit to today. You discussed drought a little bit. Where do we stand drought-wise in Iowa?
Where we're seeing the largest impacts, at least right now, are stream flows. Our inland streams are at particularly low levels, depending on where you are in the state, but right now, eastern Iowa, very low stream flows. And that's a reflection of dry soil moisture profiles. We get more infiltration of that soil moisture. It stays within the profile. It doesn't run off. We don't see tile lines running. But we did have a particularly active end of March. Overall, we're probably going to be about a half an inch above average statewide in terms of precipitation for March. And we saw a one category improvement across western Iowa, meaning that if a location was in D2 drought, it was upgraded to D1 drought. So good improvement across western Iowa, and even over the last week, improvement in southeastern Iowa, where we saw anywhere from 150% to 200% of normal. When we're looking at where we are in April, we expect anywhere from a half inch to basically 7/10 of an inch per week climatologically. So if we're not hitting those levels, that's where you can start to see as we get planted and as vegetative demand increases, along with warmer temperatures, increasing atmospheric demand, where we can start to backslide into drought conditions or see an intensification of drought conditions. We're not seeing a strong signal for that at all right now. So overall, if you want the 30,000 foot picture of where we are on drought, we've seen some improvement across much of the state, but we're in what we call structural drought, that D1, D2 category, 70 to 80% of the state, where we can easily see intensification if we do get into a drier pattern as we get into the growing season.
So you touched on a couple things that I wanted to visit about. One of them was that we have had some moisture lately, which has really seemed to help a little bit, especially on the drought level. And then what's the short-term outlook for planting season? You touched on that a little bit as well. So we're all gearing up for that. Farmers are chomping at the bit to get out there in the field. So short-term outlook and moisture's a little bit better.
Yes, with winter being particularly warm, we really didn't get a very deep frost level. It was 5 to 7 inches across the state. And in fact, the moisture in terms of snowpack that we got in January, right around the Caucasus, actually insulated the surface. So we didn't get that Arctic air intruding down into the soil profiles and freezing them deeper. So when that snowpack started to melt in late January with rainfall on top of it and a fast warm-up, we had a lot of infiltration of shallow moisture into the profile. Then we get into February, we start to see some shallow moisture being extracted with warmer temperatures and windier days and a lack of precipitation. So where we are now, I think we're still very dry across much of the state, but we did see a rebound in soil profiles. We have some shallow moisture available. The short-term outlooks are again suggesting warmer temperatures for April. The average temperature that we see across the state climatologically is about 50 degrees, and the expectation for precipitation is about 3.7 inches for April. High probabilities of warmer temperatures, but also a drier signal or a less active storm track. Ideal in terms of the soil moisture that we have now, but also getting planters rolling and getting field work started. I think we're going to see an excellent window over the next several weeks.
We talked a little bit about La Nina returning this summer and into fall. I'm hearing some things that maybe the drought may continue with more lack of moisture this summer. Does that sound about right, or have things changed?
Yeah, it's a little more complex to look at the La Nina summers. There's a high correlation with the phase of El Nino or La Nina and wintertime behavior, given that the weather patterns that we see in the winter are more widespread, or what we call synoptic, so large-scale highs and low pressures moving across the United States every 5 to 7 days. As we transition into thunderstorm-driven rainfall through the growing season, we start to see smaller scale features that will bring us our weather patterns. So the phase of El Nino or La Nina in the summertime has a low correlation. Another question I've been getting a lot is, well, we had a very warm winter. Doesn't that suggest a very warm summer? Well, no. Also a very low correlation with wintertime behavior. Where we have seen some research in the peer-reviewed literature in terms of a transition from strong El Nino into the potential for summertime La Nina is a warmer signal. Now, it's not tied in with the phase, but it's tied into that transition or the trend that we've seen for analog years in which we've had that type of transition. Now, if we look at the precipitation side of that, getting into June, July, August, it's all over the board. We've had very wet summers during a transition like this. We've had dry summers as well. But overall, given the length of drought that we've had and the longer-term precipitation deficits, along with percentiles of soil moisture being particularly low, we're going to be planting into drier soils. And let's not say that I'm not optimistic that we're going to continue to see timely rainfalls through April, May, June. But if we look at analog years going back to 1950 of that transition for April, May, June, and so neutral conditions, and even the last 30 years of trends for precipitation, we do see in that time period, so late spring into early summer, some semblance of a near normal to slightly elevated precipitation signal, meaning there is a potential there, if this transition acts as it has in the past, of more regular rainfalls that we've missed out in the growing seasons of 2021, 2022, and 2023.
If we switch to temperatures like you discussed, maybe a little bit warmer signal as we go into the summer?
Yes, that's where we do see that stronger signal with a transition to ENSO neutral conditions and then to La Nina in the summer. Now, again, El Nino, La Nina is the dominant climate driver right now for weather patterns over the United States. But we have other weather patterns that set up on a longer scale time period in the Pacific. One of them is called the Madden-Julian Oscillation that can also impact our weather patterns. So those are all the different features that we plug into our forecast and climate models to give us a better understanding of seasonal outlooks as we get into the growing season. So what that suggests is, as we get better information, better observations through late spring into summer, we put those data into the climate models, and then we're able to get better information, better forecast, and better guidance for late summer into fall and even into the winter time.
Yeah, if we look into next year, can we look out a little further than just the summer and the fall? What does next winter and the next year bring, or can we not look out that far yet?
We can look out on a general scale. Again, I mentioned that spring predictability barrier. Hard to get an idea, drill down on the very technical, the very get into the weeds type of meteorological and hydrological things that we want to see late spring into summer. But if we're talking about the phase of La Nina hanging around into fall and winter for Iowa, we generally see colder than average temperatures across the upper Midwest and expanding into the Pacific Northwest during La Nina winters, and then a wetter bullseye over the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes. Iowa happens to be right in the middle of that interface when we get into late fall and early winter. So right now, multiple months out, we're not even into summer yet. As we ingest better data into the climate models, knowing if we're transitioning truly from El Nino into La Nina, we'll get much better guidance late summer into early fall in terms of what we should expect for late fall into winter.
So advice for farmers now as they consider Mother Nature and the upcoming growing season.
First and foremost, I'm concerned about the accurate depiction of the U.S. Drought Monitor each week. We have all kinds of model data. We have meteorological data. We have radar data. We have rain gauge data, soil moisture, remote sense from satellites, but also land surface models. And then stream flows, we have gauges. We have also stream modeling. You consolidate all this information into the U.S. Drought Monitor depiction and those impacts that we're seeing from this longevity drought. Farmers are the most intuitive meteorologists on the earth. They've been on their lands forever. They've seen the weather patterns blow through. What we would like to see and get better information, better inputs from our farmers and producers are what they're seeing on the ground. Are there telltale signs of early drought creeping in? Are we seeing these longer term conditions impacting your ponds, the streams that you see around your farms, and how these are tied in with the depiction for the U.S. Drought Monitor, given that we have federal and state programs that rely on the categorization of drought. So having that on the ground information, and I get some of this when I do my field scouting in spring and summer, but if our farmers and producers get that information into my office or the National Weather Service or even the U.S. Drought Monitor author each week, we do a better job of producing a more accurate depiction of drought for our farmers that rely on programs that need that data.
Okay, so as we wrap up here a little bit, kind of from your chair, anything in particular that you'll be watching for this year? Maybe something that would be most interesting to you weather-wise as the summer season arrives and into the fall, or anything that you're looking forward to kind of watch and see transpire?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We could spend another hour on what is interesting me as we move forward into this growing season. Number one, we're generally in what we call the fifth phase of this drought. We've seen improvement, we've seen degradation, longest drought since the 50s. I'll be interested to see how our hybrids and our science behind those hybrids behaves if we kind of stay dry as we've had in the past 3 growing seasons. That's number one. Number two, are we going to break this drought with a very wet pattern over several weeks? Probably not, given the long-term nature of this drought. If you look at the stations across the state, anywhere from 70 to 80% of normal precipitation over the last 4 years. So what that's saying is that a lot of stations across the state have missed out on a full year's worth of precipitation. Again, impacts on soil moisture, impacts on stream flows, but also impacts on our farmers as well. What are the yields going to look like if we get into the 4th and 5th year of this drought? Are those timely rainfalls going to hold us on? If the science tells us that a transition from El Nino into a La Nina in summertime, we typically see warmer patterns. How much rainfall are we going to get? Are we going to stay on the wetter side as we typically do late spring into summer? Or are we going to have those $1 million rainfalls holding us on every 7 to 10 days here or there, as we've seen in 2021, 2022? So on the larger scale, let's say climate drivers that we're seeing, are we going to actually see a transition from El Nino to La Nina? It's looking that way. What are the implications on this drought? One of the questions I get asked often in terms of agriculture is, when are we going to bust this drought? Well, with these precipitation deficits that we have, we're going to need several months, if not more than a year, of above average rainfall to really quash those longer term deficits. So we're kind of sitting in an interesting position in that we haven't seen a drought of this extent in 70 years. and that's of interest in itself. We'll be studying the past several years and the pretty amazing yields that we've gotten over 2021, 2022, and even in 2023.
Well, Dr. Glisan definitely confirmed what other experts have told us before. It's going to take some long-term, above-average rainfall for us to recharge our soils and to help us bust out of these ongoing drought conditions. But I think it's worth re-mentioning Dr. Glisan's request for farmers to serve as on-the-ground monitors for drought conditions. No one has a better sense of how drought conditions are impacting the land than farmers like you, so it's important to make sure that your observations factor into our state's understanding of the drought's impact. If you'd like to learn more about that, or to reach out to Dr. Glisan's office, we included a link for you down in the notes for this podcast episode. Next up, we have Brian Waddingham. Brian's the executive director of the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary in 2024. Spokesman editor Tom Block caught up with Brian at Iowa FFA's State Leadership Conference in Ames last week.
Hey Brian, it's been a big year for the Coalition as you celebrate the organization's 20th anniversary. Take me back to the beginning in 2004 and describe why the Coalition was founded and what its mission was and continues to be to this day.
Yeah, I think back in 2004, Iowa's farm and commodity groups came together to kind of help farmers that were trying to put up new hog confinements, kind of get through the rules and the regulations, find better sites for those barns, and probably most importantly, help with neighbor relations, especially trying to enhance those neighbor relations, encouraging that livestock farmer to have a conversation before they put the barn up, just about what they were going to do, why they were going to do it. And not just with the neighbors, but within the community as a whole. And that was quite the vision 20 years ago. And I think that back then, maybe the Coalition, they thought would be around a few years to kind of help get some of the bugs worked out of these new confinement barns. But here we are 20 years later, probably just as strong now as we were then.
Yeah, how has the Coalition itself changed and grown over the past 2 decades? And have you seen any changes in the requests and challenges facing farmers?
We've been able to evolve as questions from our livestock farmers have also evolved. You know, you look at calving under roof, that was a pretty uncommon practice 20 years ago, and now it's pretty mainstream. The same with helping farmers with fish and shrimp farms. Just really anything the Iowa livestock farmer can think of to raise, the Coalition feels that we should be able to help support them in their decisions and help figure out a game plan for the future success of what they decide to do.
What do you consider to be some of the organization's most significant achievements and milestones? In essence, what has made the Coalition successful for the past 2 decades?
You know, I think just the array of services that we offer livestock farmers, from the Good Farm Neighbor Award, which is also in its 20th year. We just recognized our 182nd farm family with that award last week. We've got the Green Farmstead Partner Program, where now we've planted roughly 83,000 trees in the last 15 years on livestock farms. And again, just our ability to adapt and offer services to livestock farmers that they feel is valuable.
I was with Farm Bureau when CSIF was founded, and I've seen a lot of the families you've helped over the years. 20 years ago, you might have helped a younger beginning farmer, and now, 20 years later, you're helping some of those same families bring back the next generation. How would you describe that legacy that's being created through CSIF's services?
Well, I think that's one of the things that speaks volumes about our service is it's not only the repeated calls that we receive from farmers. Maybe we helped a farmer 10 years ago site a barn. They called us back here more recently to help bring that next generation back to the farm. But I just had a full circle moment about 2 weeks ago where it was probably right when I started, almost 14 years ago, did a farm visit. And about 2 weeks ago, I did a farm visit for his daughter that came back to the farm and tried to figure out a way to better incorporate what she wanted to do with livestock into the farm family's goals. So I think that's something that really, is something that the Coalition has been around to do. And now that we're starting to see multiple generations on farms that we've helped, it really makes you feel good.
Let's talk a little bit about the current situation out there. What kind of calls has the Coalition been fielding in 2023 and here early in 2024?
We do get calls from all livestock species within the last year or so. A lot of it's been focused on cattle. specifically calving under roof, putting up finishing barns, putting in new open feed lots, or maybe expanding any of those combinations thereof. In addition to cattle, also trees. Again, we're doing a lot with our Green Farmstead Partner Program. We've seen an uptick in farmers that raise hogs calling us. Maybe they've had barns up 5, 6, 10 years, never had trees, but now they want to do trees. From an environmental standpoint, trees look nicer. It really helps beautify the site, reduces odor, and trees really are the best neighbor enhancer that we've got out there today.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that Green Farmstead Partner Program. How does the program work? You've mentioned a little bit about why it's important, but over the years, how has it grown?
So we started that Green Farmstead Partner Program in 2009. It was originally supported by Trees Forever and the Iowa Nursery Landscape Association. And in that time, we've grown. We now have 25 nurseries that we've trained to assist livestock farmers with windbreaks. So kind of the way the program works, a livestock farmer calls us with questions on putting in a windbreak. CSIF staff likes to go out, visit with the farmer, get a better understanding of what their budget is, how much ground they're working with around the building, and then kind of what their budget might be, and if they do like a particular species of trees. And then based on that, we'll refer them to one of our nursery professionals, and that nursery professional will come out, draw up a design, as well as present them with a budget. And the coalition pays for that initial consultation. And then once the trees are in the ground, the farmer snaps a picture of the trees, and then we present that family with a really nice personalized sign that they can put out next to the windbreak.
Another one of your popular programs is the Oregon Good Farm Neighbor Award. You've recognized a couple of farmers already here in April and have several more honorees coming up this summer. Explain what the Good Neighbor Farm Award is and why it's important to recognize those farmers who are doing things right.
The Good Farm Neighbor Award was named after longtime WHO farm broadcaster Gary Wergen, who unfortunately passed away in 2003. At that time, the coalition was just getting started. We agreed to support the Good Farm Neighbor Award in conjunction with the Big Show and the Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. And a neighbor can nominate a farm family or a community member. Maybe it's a seed representative, a chemical representative, just somebody with working knowledge of that farm and family. They can get them nominated on our website. We forward those on to our committee. We have a selection committee that goes through those nominations, really looking at three things. Number one, being a good steward of their land, being a good caretaker of their livestock, and then being active in their local community and really giving back, going above and beyond of what they would have to do, but just really being a good neighbor and a really good community member. And then we like to get out and recognize at least 10 Good Farm Neighbor Award winners each year. In 2024, due to the 20th anniversary, we're shooting a little bit higher. We're hoping to get out at least 14 times to recognize new farm families, as well as go into some other counties that have had multiple winners and just kind of do a see where they are now update on their farms.
That's kind of the thing. Farmers are humble by nature. I think one of the things I've heard from a lot of your honorees is, I don't do anything that nobody else is doing. But I think it's very cool that you do those follow-ups. You have on your website, people can go out and see where all the honorees are. And if there's someone in your neighborhood, go ahead and nominate them.
Yeah, that's really the best way to do it, because that website, supportfarmers.com, is interactive. You can click on a county, and it'll show you every past winner from your county. That way you don't make the mistake of nominating them again. But yeah, that form can be filled out in just a few minutes and emailed right to our office, and we'd love to come out into your community. We still have about 15 counties that have not had a winner in the last 20 years, so I would encourage you to jump on our website, and if you live in a county that hasn't had a winner, you can get your neighbor nominated pretty quickly, and we'd love to come out.
Yeah, we know they're out there for sure. As we look forward to the rest of the year, what other activities are on tap as the coalition marks its 20th anniversary?
In addition to continuing to present Good Farm Neighbor Awards, we do have an event coming up at the State Fair on August 14th. More details to come on that, but that is just kind of recognizing the coalition for 20 years of success and helping livestock farmers grow. We also will have our annual Farming for the Future conference coming up in November, and this year will be geared towards helping young people get a foot into livestock production. There'll be more information on that coming up as well. But we're here to assist all livestock farmers, no matter the size, no matter the production type, and all of that's done at no charge and completely confidential due to the generous support of Iowa's farm and commodity groups. So if you've got questions for the coalition, you want to bring that next generation back to the farm, you just maybe want peace of mind that you're doing everything right on your livestock farm, you can give the coalition a call anytime, 800-932-2436, or find us online at supportfarmers.com.
That Farming for the Future conference is a good jumping point for my next question. Looking ahead to the next 20 years, what do you see on the horizon for agriculture in Iowa and how the coalition can continue to play a role in helping livestock farmers succeed?
Well, I think, looking out 20 years, obviously technology is going to play a bigger and bigger role. Not quite sure where that's going to take livestock production, but as we continue to add more people to the world's population, it's going to take more protein to feed them. And I do think that with whether it's cattle, hogs, dairy, fish and shrimp, poultry, turkey, there's going to be opportunities for growth in all of those sectors. And so the coalition will continue reading up on those 250 pages of rules and regs that impact livestock farmers. So when we do get a call, we know the rules. And when we go visit that farmer, we can interpret those rules as to best how they fit their farm in particular, because not all farms are the same. They're all pretty unique. So what works on one farm may not work on another. So that's why it's always a good idea to give the coalition a call and have us come out and give you peace of mind that what you're doing will work and will set you up for future success.
And I think another neat thing that you guys do at the FFA state conference, you always take a survey of the high schoolers who are there, and there's always such an enthusiasm for agriculture. What do you take away from that survey that you've done for multiple years now?
I think the biggest thing looking back on it, I think we've done this now for 16 years, the survey, or maybe this is year 17, but the optimism that these young people show. We do see a reduction in the number that come from living on farms today, but yet the numbers that want to get into some type of agriculture production has hovered around that 90% or better for the 14 years that I've been here anyway. And I just think that speaks volumes for these young people that really see an opportunity in agriculture, many of which are really seeking out livestock production opportunities. It's just really great to be here and talk to these young people about what their goals are and what the future might hold for them. And another trend we're seeing is the numbers that are going to 2-year and 4-year schools to get some type of degree before they either go back home to farm or jump into an agricultural profession. So a lot of things have changed, but yet a lot of things have stayed the same in terms of the desire to get back and stay on that farm where you grew up.
And Brian, as we wrap up here, just tell me a little bit about yourself and your staff. It's a small staff, but you get a lot of work done. And then also one more time about how people can get in touch with you guys.
The staff is pretty small. It'd be myself. Cody Havens is our field specialist. Hope Brecht is our communication specialist. Cody does the majority of the farm visits, where Hope takes care of our website, our newsletters, social media, and then she'll have an intern starting here in May that will help her throughout the summer, and probably next fall just do more and more online stuff to get our message out there, to get our name out there, and have farmers call us. But again, if you have any questions for the coalition, give us a call, 800-932-2436, or find us online at supportfarmers.com.
With the growing significance and diversity of livestock farming here in Iowa, it's no surprise that the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers remains as important today as it was 20 years ago. We'd like to congratulate Brian and his team on the Coalition's 20th anniversary, and I'd encourage you to stay tuned for more announcements from them as the year moves along. That brings us to the end of this episode, but before you leave, I'd like to mention 2 things. First is Iowa Farm Bureau's Economic Summit, which is June 14th in Ankeny. Our agenda is packed with renowned speakers who will be ready to answer your important questions about the ag economy. If you're curious about the economic pressures and opportunities facing agriculture right now, you don't want to miss this event. Registration is open, and you can learn more by visiting iowafarmbureau.com or by clicking the link in the notes for this podcast episode. The second thing I'd like to mention is conservationcountsiowa.com. Today is Earth Day, which is a great time to share the work farmers are doing to protect our land and our water all year long. You can find stats, infographics, videos, and articles to help share that amazing story at conservationcounts.iowa.com. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you found it helpful and that you'll join us for the next one on May 6th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.